Somewhere in Egypt, around 2,300 years ago, a group of scholars tried to do something no civilization had ever attempted. They tried to collect every book that existed in the world. All of it. Every play, every scientific treatise, every poem, every philosophical argument ever written down, gathered under one roof in one city. For a while, they actually pulled it off. And then, piece by piece, it all disappeared. So thoroughly that today we're not even sure exactly how it happened. A city built for knowledge. The story starts with Alexander the Great, who founded a city on the Egyptian coast in 331 BC and, typically, named it after himself. Alexander died young, and his empire was carved up by his generals. One of them, Ptolemy, took Egypt, and he took Alexander's ambition with him. Ptolemy didn't just want to rule a kingdom. He wanted Alexandria to become the intellectual capital of the entire world. His son, Ptolemy II, is the one who actually built the dream. He constructed a research institution called the Museion, literally a shrine to the muses, and the word we get museum from today. Attached to it was the library. Not a library in the way we think of one, with quiet reading rooms and a returns desk. This was closer to a fully funded national research center, with scholars living on site, paid salaries by the state, with one job: think, write, and discover. The obsessive hunt for books. Here's where the story gets a little unhinged. The Ptolemies didn't just wait for donations. They pursued scrolls with something closer to obsession. Every ship that docked in Alexandria's harbor was searched. If it carried books, the books were confiscated, copied by royal scribes, and only the copy was returned to the original owner. The library kept the originals. Ships literally arrived in Egypt and left with their own library slightly worse than when they came. At one point, Ptolemy III wanted the official state copies of the great Athenian tragedies: Aeschylus, Sophocles, Euripides, texts so precious Athens normally wouldn't let them leave the city. He offered a massive cash deposit as collateral to borrow them just to copy. Athens reluctantly agreed. Ptolemy copied them, kept the originals, and simply forfeited the deposit. Athens got a stack of copies and a small fortune. Alexandria got Greek literary history. By some estimates, the library eventually held somewhere between 400,000 and 700,000 scrolls, an almost unimaginable volume of information for the ancient world, representing years of labor from scribes, translators, and traveling agents sent specifically to hunt down rare texts in Persia, Ethiopia, and India. The golden age of discovery. What made the library extraordinary wasn't just the size of the collection, it was what happened because of it. When you put the smartest people in the ancient world in one building with access to almost everything ever written, extraordinary things start happening. Euclid worked here and wrote Elements, the geometry textbook that would go on to be used for the next 2,000 years. Eratosthenes served as chief librarian and calculated the circumference of the earth using nothing but shadows, sticks, and geometry, and got it right too within a small percentage of the actual number, in an era when most people didn't even agree the earth was round. Hero of Alexandria built early steam-powered devices and automated machines, toys of engineering that hint at an industrial revolution that never quite arrived. Herophilus performed some of the first documented human dissections, mapping the nervous system centuries before anyone else dared. This wasn't a dusty archive. It was arguably the most productive research institution humanity had built up to that point. A Silicon Valley of antiquity, except its product was pure knowledge. Cracks begin to show. Empires change hands, and libraries depend on the empires that fund them. Alexandria eventually fell into Roman hands, and Roman politics were, to put it gently, violent. In 48 BC, Julius Caesar found himself trapped in Alexandria during a civil conflict with the Egyptian court. To stop enemy ships from reaching him, he ordered the harbor set on fire. The fire spread. How much of the library it actually destroyed is one of history's most argued questions. Ancient sources disagree wildly, and some modern historians think the damage was limited to warehouses near the docks rather than the library itself. But symbolically, it's often remembered as the first blow, proof that no collection of knowledge, however vast, is safe from a war it has nothing to do with. The library likely survived this in some reduced form, but it had entered a slow decline that would stretch across centuries, not from one dramatic fire, but from something more mundane and arguably scarier: funding cuts, political instability, and neglect. Scholars left. Money dried up. Copies weren't being made as often. A library doesn't need to burn to disappear. It can simply stop being maintained until the scrolls crumble to dust on their own. The slow death. Rome's civil wars in the 3rd century AD brought more destruction to Alexandria, this time under Emperor Aurelian, whose forces fought through the city and reportedly damaged the royal quarter where the library once stood. By this point, historians believe the original Great Library was likely already gone in its grand form, its scrolls scattered among smaller institutions across the city. One of those institutions was the Serapeum, a temple that had become something like the library's daughter branch, holding a significant secondary collection. In 391 AD, a Christian mob, acting under orders from the Patriarch Theophilus during a period of religious conflict between pagans and Christians, destroyed the Serapeum. Whatever scrolls remained inside were very likely lost in that destruction. And then there's Hypatia, a brilliant mathematician, astronomer, and philosopher, one of the last great minds associated with Alexandria's intellectual tradition. In 415 AD, she was murdered by a religious mob in the street, in a killing tied to the same tensions tearing the city apart. She's often remembered as a symbolic final light of Alexandria's golden age, extinguished not by fire, but by the same human chaos. Politics, religion, mob violence that had been chipping away at the library for centuries. The myth that won't die. There's a popular story that Muslim armies burned the last remains of the library in 642 AD, when Alexandria was conquered, supposedly on the order that any book agreeing with the Quran was unnecessary, and any book disagreeing with it was dangerous, so all of them should burn. It's a dramatic story. It's also almost certainly false, or at least unsupported by any credible source from anywhere near that time period. The tale doesn't even appear in writing until roughly 600 years after it supposedly happened, and most historians treat it as a later legend rather than a documented event. The real truth is less cinematic and somehow more unsettling. There was no single dramatic villain. The library didn't die from one fire or one army. It died the way most things quietly do, through centuries of underfunding, war damage, shifting political priorities, and simple neglect, until there was nothing left to argue about destroying. What we actually lost. We will never know exactly what was in those scrolls, and that's the part that should genuinely unsettle you. We know Aristotle wrote dialogues that no longer exist. We know entire schools of Greek philosophy exist today only as fragments quoted by other authors, because the original texts vanished. We know playwrights wrote hundreds of plays we've never read a single word of. Historians estimate that we've lost the vast majority of ancient Greek literature, and Alexandria's library was where much of that literature was concentrated for safekeeping. It's not just about lost stories. It could easily have been lost science, lost medical knowledge, lost mathematics that we may have had to rediscover centuries later, more slowly, at greater cost. Some historians speculate about how different the timeline of human progress might look if that concentrated wealth of knowledge had survived intact into the modern era instead of scattering into fragments and rumors. Why it still haunts us. Today, there's a modern library in Alexandria, built in 2002, deliberately positioned near the site of the ancient original as a kind of symbolic rebirth, a statement that the idea refuses to die even when the physical thing does. The story of the library isn't really about Egypt, or Rome, or any one religious conflict. It's a story about how fragile concentrated knowledge actually is, and how easily a civilization can forget things it once knew. It's a warning dressed up as ancient history. Buildings can burn, funding can dry up, and mobs can take whatever they want. But the truly permanent loss isn't stone or gold. It's understanding, the kind that took generations to build and can vanish in far less time than it took